wax off, paint the fence. Yes, these are classic lines in one of my favorite all-time movies, The Karate Kid, a film that was released in 1984 by Columbia Pictures, directed by John G. Avildsen, and starring Ralph Macchio and Pat Morita. This movie was a legendary movie. I love it. Let me get right into it. So first of all, let's discuss The Karate Kid. As you can see, I have a Karate Kid collection right behind me. I love the movie. But let me preface by saying I'm not a big fan of the sequels per se, but I do love the new spin-off series on Netflix, which has 3 seasons, called Cobra Kai. Love it. They're currently doing season 4. So let me get right into The Karate Kid. So first off, we have John G. Avildsen. Now, he's the director who did the original 1976 Rocky, which of course I love as well. So very well done. And the creator, Robert Mark Kamen, wrote the stories for The Karate Kid. Now, he was inspired by a real-life story that occurred in Los Angeles involving a young teenager who was bullied and then took up karate for self-defense purposes and would go on and defend himself. So that inspired him, by reading the story in the Los Angeles Times, to come up with the creation of The Karate Kid. Now, at the same time, there's a totally unrelated character in DC Comics called The Karate Kid. I'm not going to get too much into that because it has nothing to do with the series, and it wasn't like they ripped off the title, but they did have to put in the credits of this movie that had nothing to do with that DC Comics character. So let's move on here. So the premise of The Karate Kid is we have a bully teenager by the name of Daniel LaRusso who moves from New Jersey to California with his mother. His father's recently passed away. He's an only child, and his mother is struggling from job to job. And they live in a very basic, low-income apartment building in Reseda, California. Now, they tried to pick an actor for this role, and Robert Downey Jr., believe it or not, was actually considered for the role of Daniel LaRusso. Now, the original name wasn't going to be Daniel LaRusso, and I'll get right into that. It was another last name. But they ended up going with Ralph Macchio, who's Italian, so they changed it to Daniel LaRusso, which I thought was pretty cool. So they picked Ralph Macchio, who at this time was actually in his 20s, but he looks quite youthful. So he portrayed a 17-year-old teenager. And then we got Pat Morita, who's a stand-up comedian, Japanese actor, and he was well known for his role in Happy Days, but had no martial arts skills really at all. And they brought him in as the wise, handyman Mr. Miyagi, which of course would go on to be a legend with some very classic lines in this movie. So in the 1980s, before we had Rotten Tomatoes, the internet, etc., nobody really saw any trailers to this movie, and it's what I consider a sleeper hit, which means nobody knew it was coming. It premiered in theaters, and it just took off like wildfire. I was 11 years old. My father took me to see this movie in Victoria, BC, Canada, and I didn't know what I was getting into. I got right into this movie. I love this movie, and I will just say right now, I've been in movie theaters countless times, and this is the #1 movie of my entire life where I've seen an audience react in such a fashion in a movie where they got up, stood up, and cheered as if they're watching a real karate match. It was insane. People are cheering, and there's a climactic ending to this movie. And when you see it for the very first time, you don't see it coming. So it was really cool. So I will say that was neat. I've seen that in Rocky movies too, where they basically have really cool fights, people cheering this. But The Karate Kid, 100% was light years ahead of that for the audience reacting to it. So what we have here is we've got young Daniel LaRusso. He, it's the weekend before school starts, high school, senior year, and he's on the beach and he meets Allie, portrayed by actress Elizabeth Shue. Now, he starts to develop a relationship with her. Meanwhile, her ex-boyfriend, Johnny Lawrence, portrayed by actor William Zabka, comes in the picture, is obviously jealous. Now, he's also a black belt in karate. He's like the leader of the Cobra Kai. It's a karate dojo in California. And he reacts by seeing them together on a beach. And that's the first instance where Daniel gets bullied. And this will continue throughout the course of the movie where he's getting bullied. Now, bullying's a serious issue. And in this day and age, it leads to teen suicides. It's a pretty serious topic. So in the 1980s, nobody really explored the aspect of bullying until The Karate Kid came out, which I thought was really good. It was before its time dealing with such a serious subject. And the impact it has on this character. This wasn't a comedy by any means. This poor kid was in true turmoil, and he had nowhere to turn. He didn't have a father anymore. His mother was just trying to work day to day to make the rent. And he lived in a low-income apartment building. He had really no one to turn to, no friends, just a girl he was interested in named Allie. Well, there's a handyman at this apartment building, and his name is Mr. Miyagi. And this is the character portrayed by actor Pat Morita. Now, he is super cool. You just see him as a handyman, elderly man. You have no idea this guy's a karate master. He's originally from Okinawa, and he's got a really interesting and touching backstory in this movie as well. And I won't give any spoilers away if you haven't seen it in that regard, but it does break your heart when you learn about what's happened to his previous family from way back when. You also discover he's a war hero. And he worked for the American Army during World War II. So that was cool too. But what happens is he's getting bullied, Daniel LaRusso, getting bullied, and all of a sudden Mr. Miyagi jumps in action and saves him one brutal night where he's being attacked by numerous friends of Johnny and Johnny himself, part of the Cobra Kai group. And throughout this movie, we get to look into the actual Cobra Kai dojo, and we see their sensei, John Kreese, portrayed by actor Martin Kove, and he's just chilling in this role. I mean, he did a bang-up performance as far as I'm concerned, with his line of "No mercy. Mercy is for the weak." So basically, he's teaching his students the wrong idea of what karate is. It's about self-defense, but what he's teaching them is you strike first, no mercy. So what happens is these students have a bad teacher, like Mr. Miyagi points out in the movie, and they come after Daniel. So Mr. Miyagi attends the Cobra Kai dojo with Daniel to try and do a ceasefire, call a truce, but John Kreese will have nothing of it. He wants his students to fight Daniel on the mat, to which point there's a poster of a tournament coming up, and I have that picture behind me in my display there, of the All Valley Under-18 Karate Tournament. And Mr. Miyagi suggests, well, you know what? Let's do it at the tournament. Of course, now that saved Daniel from a beating for a couple months. But he's got to train. He's got to have to face these guys in a karate match. So the training is cool, unique. If you've seen it, when you see it for the first time, you'll see what I mean. His techniques is nothing like you've ever seen. There's no Rocky montage or anything like that. He's doing chores, painting the fence, sanding the deck. And most importantly, with all the vehicles that Mr. Miyagi has, he has a whole bunch of classic vehicles. I'll get into that in a minute. He has to wax on and wax off. And you see the tension build up with the character Daniel, where at one point, he's fed up. He's done. He's like, you're wasting my time. I'm just doing all your chores for you. To which it explodes into a really good scene where Mr. Miyagi asks him to redo all those chores, but stand up and do them. And he realizes he's been secretly learning great karate moves, great karate blocking techniques. So we get into defense, and that was fantastic. You didn't see that coming. There's another point in the movie again where you see this historical crane technique. I'll get into that. As you can see behind me, Daniel LaRusso is about to do what's called the crane technique, which basically you see Mr. Miyagi on a log on a beach, and he's essentially got his arms up in the air like this, and he essentially does the crane technique, where he sweeps one leg up in the air and lands on the other. And it's really cool, as he calls it, lock in defense. So we get to see that, and throughout the movie, we get to see Daniel, haphazardly trying it on the log. Of course, it's not that easy to do. So let's get into it. So again, there's a really touching scene here where you see a father and son connection between two opposites. You have a American teenager, Daniel LaRusso, and you have an elderly Japanese man, Mr. Miyagi. Two different cultures, two different generations, but they come together, and it's like a father that Daniel didn't have and a son that Mr. Miyagi didn't have. Really cool and touching there. There's a very emotional scene in the movie where Mr. Miyagi's had a bit to drink. Daniel comes to his house, and he basically talks about his past, and it's heart-wrenching. It really is. Another great moment in this movie is a nice birthday surprise that Daniel gets when it's his birthday. And I will just say, and I'm going to throw this in there, that he gets to pick a car. Any car that Mr. Miyagi has, because he has all these classic cars on his property. And he picks this car here, okay? Yes, he does pick a 48 Ford Super Deluxe. And interestingly enough, Ralph Macchio, to this day, owns that vehicle still, the original one. And it's featured in the spin-off series, which I'll talk about, Cobra Kai. So I thought that was super cool. So, again, the training's really cool. The romance building between Ali and Daniel's really authentic, I thought. And, you see his morale build. He starts to build some courage, and it's really cool. You see this character starting to develop. Similar to Rocky, where you saw in the original Rocky started training, build up his confidence level. You see that with Daniel here, too. Let's get to the tournament. The tournament was awesome. It plays some great 80s tunes throughout this movie, but there's really a good one in there, You're the Best. And I love that song. It's a classic. They play that throughout the karate tournament too. And I have to say, he gets to face down every one of the opponents, every one of the Cobra Kai bullies. And there's a scene in the movie where he gets injured, and you pretty much think it's over. And all I have to say is, Mr. Miyagi jumps in action to help his wound. Awesome scene, I love it. Now, let's get into Johnny versus Daniel. It's going to be the climactic scene in this movie. Again, everybody thinks Johnny's going to win. I will say this, because if you haven't seen the movie, I don't want to spoil it, but I will say, when I first saw it as 11 years old, I sat there and I thought for sure Daniel was going to lose. Let's just put it that way. And there's a signature move in this movie, and to this day, it's my favorite climax of any movie. I don't care which one it is. The Karate Kid tops it, has an original climax you didn't see coming, and everybody in that theater, and when I was 11, stood up and cheered. It was just fantastic. Okay, so the Karate Kid, sleeper hit. I loved it. On a scale of 1 to 10, I give the Karate Kid an 11, easily 11. It's one of my top 10 favorite movies. So let's get into any of the cons. I don't really have any cons. I love this movie at 100%. The only thing I will say is there's some karate experts out there that really question the signature move used at the climax scene of the Karate Kid as possibly an illegal karate move. I don't know. I'm not a karate expert by any means, but I loved it anyways. And there was a bunch of YouTube videos for decades after the Karate Kid saying that Johnny should have won. He was actually the good guy. So it's actually quite comical to see those videos. You can see them on YouTube. They're quite interesting. So let's get into the sequels. I've done reviews on the Karate Kid Part 2, the Karate Kid Part 3, and then, the next Karate Kid. I enjoyed the Karate Kid Part 2. Karate Kid Part 3, not so much. The next Karate Kid didn't even have Daniel or Ralph Macchio in it. It had a new person, Hilary Swank. Horrible movie. I did a review. Check it out. But that's, as far as the Karate Kid saga goes, the magic is in this movie, the original movie, by far. None of the others compare to it. What's really cool, though, is a few years ago, creators of Cobra Kai had seen the successful Creed spin-off series from Rocky, and both Ralph Macchio and the new creators of Cobra Kai were inspired by, what if we took the characters from the original 1984 Karate Kid in today's day, where they'd be in their 50s, and we do a whole new generational story through a season. And I gotta say, Cobra Kai, and it comes to series, is an 11 out of 1 to 10. It is fantastic. All I have to say is, it's just amazing to see Ralph Macchio as Daniel LaRusso, William Zabka back as Johnny Lawrence, and to see those characters, and then see their kids and their offspring, and a new generation. And there's lots of 80s throwbacks. I'll have a review of the Cobra Kai later, but fantastic series. I highly, highly recommend Cobra Kai. Definitely see the Karate Kid series first. Again, I have to mention, they go down in as far as level of what's good in the Karate Kid. Karate Kid's up here, Karate Kid 2, Karate Kid 3, and then next Karate Kid we'll pretend would never happen. Unfortunately, as we know, Pat Morita did pass away, so he's not featured in the Cobra Kai series, but you do get to see his gravesite, and Daniel has a true connection to Mr. Miyagi. But the movie was more about karate. It touched on a serious subject of bullying, and it touched on a relationship between two unorthodox people. Like, you have a teenager and an elderly man, and they just develop this really cool bond of friendship. And yeah, and you see that spawned into the Cobra Kai. Like I say, fantastic movie. Highly recommend it. You don't have to be a karate fan to enjoy this movie, but it's just inspiring. It feels like the teenage version of Rocky. It really does. The karate version of Rocky. You see, Daniel LaRusso is basically Rocky. He's the underdog in this tale, and he really strives, and he comes out on top. Highly recommend the Karate Kid. If you've never seen it, go see it. It stands the test of time. Doesn't matter, it took place in the 80s. And if you love the 80s like I do, it's a great 80s movie. Just fantastic. Anyways, thumbs up all the way up for the Karate Kid. Wax on, wax off. See you later.